So today is a day that is set aside in the calendar of our nation, along with other nations, as Remembrance Sunday. It is, of course, the nearest Sunday to the 11th of November, Armistice Day. It is a day chosen to remember that there is a cost to war, a cost in human lives. Most of us have lived most, if not all, of our lives through a time of extended peace. And peace is to be appreciated much above war. Now, of course, I know that some of you here were children during the occupation. But I would dare to say that the real horrors of war were not your daily experience. Not to say that you didn't experience some of the dreadful things that did happen. But the real horrors of the front line were not your daily experience. Of course, in the last few years, we have witnessed the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I suspect that is the closest any of us have had to the spectre of war. Because of the fallen, sinful nature of the human heart, sometimes peace can only be achieved through war. It just sounds horrible to say that, but it is true. But we should be in no doubt that war is a terrible thing. And while we are thankful for the benefits that peace brings, it would be wrong to forget that those benefits are built on the lives of many young men and women who died for our peace. And so it is that we gladly join with others around the nations who are remembering that very thing, that our peace is built on the deaths of very many young people. We remember that this morning. One of the many very sad things about war is that it leaves lasting scars. Now, the obvious ones, of course, are like lost limbs and such like that are suffered by individuals. But then there are the more hidden ones that really are only recently being recognised, like post-traumatic stress syndrome. But what I'm thinking about this morning, though, is the underlying attitude that there is between formerly warring nations. The war has ended, but the peoples of each nation still eye one another up with a certain amount of hostility. You can't trust them, or those people are a vicious lot. Those kind of thoughts lodge in the minds of many, again, often for very many years after the end of war. You see, real peace is more than the cessation of fighting. Real peace involves reconciliation. Without reconciliation, we are still at war, at least internally. In our minds, the war is still going on. There is no peace within. And this kind of hostility between man and man is but a reflection of the hostility between man and God. Of course, we can't wage war against God in the usually accepted meaning of the word, but we remain hostile towards him. To use the words of a pop song, the trenches are dug within our hearts. You see, we don't like the idea of someone being greater than us. We don't like him telling us how we should live. We find his laws too precise. He is altogether too righteous in his standards for our liking. And so we seek to have nothing to do with him. The problem is, though, that he has every right to tell us how we should live, because he created us. What's more, he created us in his image to reflect his glory. He created us in such a way that we could enjoy fellowship and friendship with him. But it hardly needs saying that we don't experience that anymore. That's not how we live today. The human race, we have turned our backs on our Creator, and we are paying the price for that. We think we are truly free, that we've cast off the bounds that God has set for us. But days like today, like Remembrance Sunday, remind us that war between nations is a regular and common lot for mankind. This is the kind of price we pay for wanting nothing to do with the fount of all good. We tell ourselves everything is okay, when the evidence before our eyes is quite contrary to everything being okay. And the problem just gets worse. Now, the war between man and God will come to an end. But unless there is reconciliation, the war will end for us, as it did for the Nazis in World War II, with a crushing defeat. Judgment Day is not a joke. It is not a made-up story to frighten little children. A day is coming when every single one of us will have to give an account to our Maker as to how we have lived. Have you lived to the glory of God? Have you enjoyed fellowship with him? Well, I can say with all certainty that if you are not a Christian, you won't have done those things. You've not lived to his glory. You have not enjoyed fellowship with him. And you know in your heart that only the guilty verdict awaits you, and eternal punishment will follow. As I say, the only way to prevent this outcome is if there is prior reconciliation. In the wars of this world, wars end and reconciliation follows, and usually after quite some time. But we read the most amazing thing in the Bible. In that passage we read together, Romans 5, and in the 10th verse it says, "When we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son." You see that? When we were enemies. Why when we were enemies? It's because there could be no other way. You see, if we were left alone, if we were left to ourselves, we wouldn't bother seeking peace. As I said just now, our natural inclination is to want nothing at all to do with God. Not the true God, anyway. You know, we're happy with a God we can manipulate, a God we can make in our likeness, but we simply do not want the true God who has power and authority over us. So there's no way that we would reach out to him. And that is why those who are reconciled to God were his enemies at that time. But see too, we are reconciled to God by the death of his Son. Let's not forget God did not wage war on us. We waged war on him. He is the offended party. And yet he is the one who is the driving force in this reconciliation. Most of us, we would be like, well, you started it. This is your problem. You sort it out. But not God. God is kind and compassionate beyond our wildest imaginations. He does come to us. He does reach out to us. And what a cost it is to him to make this reconciliation, the death of his Son. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He is God the Son. You see, when God created us, he created us to have fellowship with him. He wasn't lonely. He didn't need us. He was already of such a nature that he was self-sufficient in every way. And when you think about it, it couldn't really be any other way. But he created us to share in what he already had. And we walked away from that with all the moral consequences that entailed. But our God determined that he would not leave everyone to suffer the full cost of that rebellion. He devised a plan by which some would be brought back into a right relationship with him. And that plan entailed the Son of God being a substitute for a group of people. He came into this world as a man, not just the appearance of a man, but he took to himself a true, frail human nature, human flesh, just like us. And that, of course, necessitated him being born just like the rest of us. But because he is God, there had to be something supernatural about his birth, didn't there? Well, strictly speaking, it was his conception that was actually supernatural. He was born to a young virgin. We think she was young anyway. His true humanity was on view to all as he grew up in Nazareth. But something a lot of people know about Jesus is that when he was an adult, he was crucified. Now, I suppose fewer and fewer people know this, as what we consider the basic tenets of Christianity, they are increasingly disappearing from public life. But that's the fact. That's the fact. About 33 years of age, he was nailed up to a Roman cross. He hadn't done anything wrong, and the Roman governor was quite keen to release him. But pressured by the religious elite of the day, he did have him crucified. And there Jesus died. For an innocent man to die like that, and for a cruel Roman governor to uncharacteristically give in to the demand of people he despised, to do that, well, there must have been something more going on. And there certainly was. Remember, when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. When Jesus was crucified, God's plan to reconcile a people to himself was being realized, being put into effect. But because it was God's plan, and because God is eternal, there were insights into this event years in advance. For example, the prophet Isaiah, he lived about 700 years before Jesus. But he wrote about the Messiah. He wrote things like this: "He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter. He was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. Now, you can read those things and many more in Isaiah chapter 53. But even, so that was 700 years in advance, but even before that, King David wrote some amazing things about this event. Now, King David lived about 1,000 years before Jesus was born. And in Psalm 22, which he wrote, he opened with, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" The very words that Jesus cried out from the cross. David wrote, "He trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him." And this was the very mockery that Jesus experienced while he was dying on the cross. And David also wrote, "They part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture." And this is just what the Romans did for Jesus' clothing once they stripped him and nailed him up. And contained in that same psalm, Psalm 22, particularly verses 14 and 15, there's a description of someone being crucified, even though crucifixion as a means of death had not yet been invented. These things could be known in advance because this was God's plan of reconciliation. And remember, of course, that there is no advance in advance with God. And so Jesus Christ, the Son of God, died the punishment that rightly belonged to others. He was their substitute. For the transgression of my people was he stricken, as God said through the prophet Isaiah. Now, if Jesus had been any man, any death would have been the end of him. And yet here we are talking of a death for a person bearing the sins of many others and suffering the wrath of God for all that. Well, that would have crushed any mere human. But Jesus wasn't any mere human. He was the God-man. Even death, and such a death as that, could not hold him. That same passage in Isaiah, chapter 53, it declares, "When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days." He shall prolong his days, even after he has been sacrificed for sin. How's that possible? Well, Jesus was crucified and died on a Friday and then laid in a tomb. But on the Sunday morning, he was risen from the dead. The tomb was empty, and Jesus was appearing here and there to his disciples. Jesus makes peace between God and men. He brings reconciliation between the two. But you may be asking, and I hope you are, how can I benefit from what he has done? Well, as I said, he died as a substitute. He died for others. So your starting point is that it is not a forlorn hope that he died for you. In the most famous sentence in the Bible, it states, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." That's John 3:16, if you didn't know. I ask, is there anything in those words that you can say precludes you? Patently not. Doesn't the very word whosoever, doesn't it invite you to come close, come near? God does not put any roadblocks in our way. He desires people to come close. But come close to do what? He tells us to believe in his Son. And it is evident from our reading of the Bible that this kind of belief It's not just a recognition that there was a Jesus. As we read our Bibles, it is clear, though, that faith is the key. The Apostle Paul wrote, "By grace are ye saved through faith." We receive the favour that God holds out to us by faith. I don't know whether or not you have or will grasp the promises in the gospel and be saved and reconciled to God. What I do know is that some people who hear this message, they do grasp those promises, and some don't. But I also know there is no way to eternal peace except through this plan of God's. Anyone who thinks they can work their way into God's good books, well, they simply have not had a good, long, hard look at their own hearts. Today, we remember those who gave their lives so that we could enjoy peace. Why not make this day the day that you came to peace with God through the death of his own dear Son, Jesus Christ? Why not make that true for you? Amen.